some 25 years ago, I was a doctoral student living in Paris and commuting once a week, every other semester, to Bordeaux, where I would teach quite boring classes to first-year students on Monday mornings. So I'd stay overnight in a cheap hotel where there were no bathrooms in the bedrooms, but there were TV sets with cable TV, which at the time was not so usual. And one night, I happened to see an excerpt of a documentary movie. So you saw some of those excerpts here. An excerpt of the documentary movie showing Dr. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, her sister Liz, in Georgia State, interacting with bonobos, with two bonobos, Kanzi and Panbanisha. They were all using spoken English and a keyboard with arbitrary signs that were called lexigrams. This moment that I saw on TV was pretty brief, but it was intense. And the scenes that I saw randomly by accident that night remained haunting for me. Now, I was at the time writing two dissertations, one in literature and the other in philosophy, so I did not really explore the matter much further. A decade later, when I was a young full professor at Cornell, thanks to a fellowship, I could study cognitive science on the issue of language, especially. I remembered Kanzi and I began digging into the research at that point. And I learned after some time that the bonobos and several scientists had moved to a private research facility located in Des Moines, Iowa. So in 2010, it was not so easy for me to get access to the lab, but in September of that year, I visited for the first time what was then called the Great Ape Trust. I did not anticipate how long-lasting for me this initial week at the trust would become. What I was seeing was completely in line with the impressions I could gather from reading articles and books, from watching the admittedly few videos that were then available online. But at the same time, the impression was wholly different. Language was everywhere in this lab. Humans would speak with the apes. The staff was wearing T-shirts with the lexigrams printed on them. Keyboards of different kinds, some computerized, other not computerized, would be available nonstop. And Kanzi was also clearly uttering sounds. You heard some of them in the video just before, that would not belong to the bonobo repertoire, and that sounded close to English words, although to my ear they were, and to this day they largely remain difficult to understand, with probably the exception of a few phrases, such as the "right now" that impatient Kanzi would urgently pronounce with his high-pitched voice. Beside language, the apes had access to toys, to magazines, to books. They would watch videos of their past in Georgia or commercial movies. They were grooming each other, as well as Sue and Liz, who would spend hours in physical contact with the apes in the enclosures. During my first two visits in Des Moines in 2010, 2011, three main ideas occurred to me. One, what the scientific protocol had produced in terms of change for the language bonobos, using Savage-Rumbaugh's category of language bonobos. What was happened through the scientific protocol was far greater than what the disciplinary constraints of scientific communication was able to transmit. That is, you had a scientific protocol producing more than what science could completely capture. Events would occur on a daily basis that supposedly, if I were to believe what normal science was claiming, could not happen. For instance, in a gratuitous act of information sharing that is usually considered to be uniquely human, baby Tico would show me his rooms and his toys as I'd see him again 1 year after my first stay. Or Kanzi's nephew Enyota would begin an interaction with me using his keyboard to notice that the patterns on the old shirt he was playing with and the patterns on the shirt I was wearing were the same being the term that he selected. Panbanisha would be conscious of my initial lack of fluency with the lexigram, and she would slow down her pace so that I could understand her request. All of this was happening. in banal interactions with no preparation of any kind. Two, this whole scene was like a living fiction. I do not mean to say it was like a lie, a fabrication, but rather something akin to the avant-garde practice of the 1970s living theater made of collective improvisations and performative acts. In a sense, the bonobos were playing the role of the great apes having language in as much as they were fully personally collaborating with the scientists. Like actors, like players, they were themselves, in their case, individual bonobos, they were themselves and somebody else. The emphasis was on a becoming human that was materialized in a meaningful and singular way, not a mere repetition of us, Homo sapiens. Third idea I got, probably because Sue and I would often speak about Greek philosophy, I constantly thought of Plato's dialogues and of the way Plato would weave elements of everyday existence, random encounters, anecdotal facts, or well-known settings into the very fabric of his highly theoretical philosophy. Similarly, Kanzi was not talked at, not exactly talked to in general, but he was part of a dialogue with other animals, be these animals reputedly human or not. From this third idea came the impetus to write with Sue a book of dialogues where the apes would interact with us, often interrupting us like the janitor at the gym in Plato's dialogue entitled Lysis, for instance, and sometimes commenting. That volume was published in 2018 under the title Dialogues on the Human Ape, but in a different form, as at the end of 2013, after the philanthropist who had first brought the bonobos to Iowa had unplugged the cord financially. And after two former PhD students of Sue's, Jared Tagliatella and Bill Hopkins, would take over the lab, after that point, Sue herself and most people closely associated with her would no longer be welcome at the facility. Today, we live in a world where Kanzi's mother, Matata, has died, where his sister, Panbanisha, has died, and he himself has died unexpectedly a month ago. Sue's sister, Liz, has died as well. Sue has not been admitted in the lab for more than a decade, a period during which only a handful of research articles on new symbolic experiments involving the bonobos have been produced. So this is all very sad, clearly, as are for the apes, the removal, as are painful for the apes, the removal of the human family, the crude downsizing of the symbolic and linguistic environment they were used to, the impediments to communication through the constant wearing of face masks by humans, the limited access to an outdoor area, and the apparent interdiction for the bonobos to be in contact with others via phone or via video. All elements that strikingly, contrast with the years in Georgia and even the early years in Iowa. So it is very sad, but Enyota and his son Tico and the rest of the original bonobo family remain in the Des Moines lab, currently overseen by Jared Tagliatella, who could not join us today. After a long separation, I was able last year to visit and to note that during the pilot phase of a study I lead about language and visual arts, you have a painting by Kanzi, of Kanzi, it's a self-portrait. So I was able to note last year that at least Kanzi and Enyota retain a very high level of comprehension of spoken English, along with a very robust command of the lexigrams that they learned, and they still have, or Enyota still has, I think, a strong personal desire to communicate. Kanzi left us, but Enyota is alive. And moreover, the data from the 1990s and the 2000s, early 2000s at least, especially those involving Kanzi, are worthy of renewed considerations, perhaps also involving methods that were not available before, such as the treatment of audio recordings or the enrollment of AI tools. In other words, while our workshop today is prompted by and dedicated to the heroic memory of Kanzi, who led the way for a better understanding of what becoming human would entail, our meeting is not about him alone. And it is not just an evocation of the past and not exactly a memorial. It is an invitation to build a different sort of future that would be based on the both remarkable and painful lessons of yesteryear. Thus, I would like to place our event at the intersection of the three ideas I originally had and that I just listed to you. One, we are here to showcase an encompassing view of research where the scientific is both affirmed and exceeded in a transdisciplinary way via the humanities and the social sciences. Science, humanities, and social sciences together, if you wish. Two, we share an ongoing concern about the redefinition of the human animal and its plural becoming. And three, this is a dialogue where each of us should speak freely, and quite probably we will disagree, which is always nice in a sense, because it's better to be able to disagree rather than being silenced. And in our disagreement, we will precisely create a space for collective thinking that could go beyond the usual limitations of the given.